I'd like to call this meeting to order, a regular meeting of the Village Board on Monday, August 19th at or around 7 p.m. in the Germantown Village Hall Boardroom and also can be accessed via WebEx. This meeting has been given public notice in accordance with sections 19.83 and 19.84 of the Wisconsin statutes in such form that will apprise the general public and news media of subject matter that is intended for consideration and action. Roll call shows all village board members present except for trustee Pieper, who is excused. At this time, I'll ask us all to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is President's reports. Just a couple things to report tonight, mostly information about upcoming events. August 22nd, there is an event at the Fireman's Park. It's called Music at the Pavilion, and it starts at 6 o'clock and ends at 10. And at this particular outing, the name of the band is Bootjack Road. I don't know if you remember, it was at 4th of July 2 years ago, I believe they were at our event. So it's a good band. If you enjoy that type of music, please consider coming. On August 26th, we have a second Plan Commission meeting scheduled, and that is at 6:30 here in the Germantown Village Boardroom. And on August 28th, there is a library board meeting scheduled. And Trustee Cutts, is that held here at the boardroom or at the library?
The library.
Okay, thank you. So anyone interested for that meeting, it will be held at the library starting at 6 p.m. With that, that concludes President's report, so we can go to announcements of forthcoming events of public interest, committee and department reports. And before we get to committee reports and department reports, we have a presentation listed on tonight's agenda. And the presentation is for accommodation of Sergeant Brock Makowski, Officer Jared Spreeder, Officer Jeremy Peterson, and Officer Steve Hillman. At this time, I'll ask the police chief to come forward and present the information for these accommodations. Chief.
Thank you. I'm here today to present accommodations to these officers for the events of October 23rd of last year. I just wanted to start by saying October 23rd seems a little ways away for us now. But I'll point out that to this department, to these officers, those events are very close behind us. We still have not moved forward entirely from them. These officers experienced something that few officers will never experience. It was an ordeal that will stay with them the rest of their lives. And I certainly recognize that the family of those officers were also asked to sacrifice a great deal during that time. I'm very happy to see a number of them could be with us today, and I thank you all for the sacrifice you made, and it's certainly recognized by this department. At this time, I would also like to say today we're presenting letters of commendation. Later this year, we're going to hold an awards banquet, the first ever for the Germantown Police Department. At that awards banquet, there will be further recognition for this event and further awards for this event. I did want to bring them in front of this board, though, to recognize them in front of you all. So at this time, I would ask Sergeant Spreiter, Officer Hillman, Officer Peterson, and Officer Sergeant Makowski to step forward, please. You stand in front so everybody can stare at you. On Monday, October 23rd, 2023 at 6:36 p.m., Germantown Communications was contacted by Germantown School District employee Frank Lord, reporting a male subject acting erratically in the parking lot of Kennedy Middle School. He had been contacted by a cleaning supervisor who said he confronted the subject pulling signs off a signpost, pulling posts out of the ground, and damaging property. The employee confronted the subject but felt threatened by his response. He moved away from the subject and contacted Franklin Lord. He then watched the subject drag a bike rack to the building, leaned it up against the building, and used it as a ladder to climb onto the building. Sergeant Jared Spreiter, Officer Brock Mikowski, Officer Jeremy Peterson, and Officer Stephen Hillman responded to the complaint. Officer Jeremy Peterson responded and began a search of the school grounds to locate the subject. Officer Hillman arrived on scene and observed the subject on the canopy of the entrance and then watched him climb onto the roof of the school. Sergeant Spreiter and Officer Hillman followed the subject onto the roof. Officers observed the subject and pursued him on the roof. At some point, the subject displayed a handgun and fired at officers. Officers returned fire and the subject climbed down from the roof and ran west along the building. Officer Mikowski had been in the parking lot operating a drone to Officer Balin's 2 officers on scene. Officer Mikowski fired at the subject to stop the threat to officers and students and other civilians inside the school. The subject fell to the ground and later died from his injuries. At the time of the incident, the building had several students and adults inside participating in a variety of activities. Officers, understanding the danger to lives, did not hesitate in their action and acted heroically to stop the threat presented by the subject. Pursuant to Germantown Police Department Policy 1014.4, you are receiving this letter of commendation for outstanding job performance during incident 23-19053. Your conduct during the investigation demonstrates your character and is likely to have saved lives that evening. Officer Spreiter. Sergeant Kolsky. Thank you all for attending this evening.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, gentlemen, for coming to this meeting and allowing us to show our gratitude for your service on that night. We will then go to announcements of forthcoming events of public interest, committee and department reports, starting with committee chairs with Trustee Kaminsky.
Public Works will meet in this room on Wednesday, September 4th at 5:30 PM.
All right. Trustee Rick Miller.
General Government and Finance will meet on Monday, September 16th at 5:30 PM.
Thank you. Trustee Hudson.
Good evening. Public Safety will meet in this room, September 9th, Monday at 5:30 PM.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to bring forward for announcements of forthcoming events of public interest, committee or department reports? Seeing there is nothing else, we will then go to citizen input. If anyone is within our audience that would like to participate in citizen input or is joining us via WebEx, you're welcome to do so at this time. If you are within our audience, we would ask that you fill out a yellow slip with your name and your address so that the village clerk can get it correct for the record and come to the podium and state your name and your address as well for those that are watching or within our audience. If you're joining us via WebEx, please make your wishes known so that the moderator can bring you forward at the time that's available for you to present your citizen input.
Sarah Larson, Butternut Road in Germantown. Several items to talk about tonight. I handed out 2 copies of emails from open records requests. And I've been before the board here asking for the return of a citizen's $1,400 CUP permit fee. And I think maybe there are only a few select people that know the true sequence of events that happened there. So I thought if you actually have the emails and can look at the chain of communication, you'll see that the village did act unethically and should be returning that $1,400 to the resident. Let's just start with this. This is from our planning director to Mr. Grosnick. Since I was not included in the process, I'm sure I don't know the whole, much less correct story behind the land purchase negotiations between the village attorney and you and your attorney. But given the fact that there's a CUP application for the office building property, can I assume that negotiations are done and you're moving on? Anyway, hope things are going well for you. His response: the village has dragged their feet for 15 months. It's apparent that the village isn't very interested by the way the process has been dragged out and the lack of response by the village attorney. If the village is truly interested, they should put together an offer to purchase today with the terms we've discussed. I never experienced anything this ridiculous. I do not know what the village is doing, but it is unprofessional. And so this was the email that our planning director forwarded to our village administrator. And so then they eventually loop in the village president. And then Mr. Grosnick is asking for terms on the contract. And so this was that communication I started with was precipitated because the village resident had turned in a conditional use permit for the Grosnick property because they were looking to purchase it, but they wanted to make sure that the property could be used for their business. And the application did indicate the intention to purchase, and the village told them that they needed to have Mr. Grosnick sign that permit application as the owner of the property. So you can't feign ignorance and say, oh, it's very unusual for someone to get a conditional use permit before they purchase when you knew what the intent was. So this goes on. Further, then in July, from our planning director to the village administrator and village president, if we're going to get this deal done, I think someone needs to talk to Brian and tell him to make this a priority. Is it possible that Brian does not have the correct contact information? Something just doesn't add up. So then when you go down, we're getting to August, and it says here that the conditional use property is going to be on the August 14th meeting, and that it would likely be on the September 18th village board meeting. And so this is from the Director Retzloff to the attorney, Dean, and Mr. Krecklow. My point is this: if the village doesn't reach an agreement with Jerry very soon to buy this property and the adjacent 5-acre vacant lot, we're probably going to lose out on this property. In my opinion, the office parcel provides a critical access opportunity to any development that occurs on the 5-acre parcel. Therefore, if we can't acquire the office parcel, we probably shouldn't go through with the 5-acre purchase. And it goes on. And so the conditional use passes the plan commission. The village gets an accepted offer August 24th. And then our plan director puts it back to Mr. Grosnick saying, because the resident inquired what the status was of that conditional use permit. And so then we dodged it and reached out to Mr. Grosnick and said, I told Greg that the plan commission action on August 14th was to recommend approval of his use permit, but that the plan commission's role is only advisory at this point. I told him that the conditional use permit is tentatively scheduled for the September 18th village board meeting for final action. So then, however, despite knowing that there is an accepted purchase offer from the village for the office building parcel, I was hesitant to say anything to Greg about this, nor do I want to get involved in whatever transaction he has going on with you. So pretty much then it bounces it back to Mr. Grosnick to tell the resident he's SOL and to quit pursuing the permit. So I think that it's incumbent upon you to return that gentleman's money, because clearly the village didn't have an accepted offer, hadn't been communicating consistently, and then swooped in with the knowledge that this resident wanted the property. That's not professional. And so I think as you look at some of the communication, the chain, and different things that have come up in these meetings, you'll see why I'm saying we need an RFP for legal services. Lastly is FOIAs. People wouldn't be having to do FOIAs if it didn't appear that things were happening below the table. I've made 3 requests the end of April with no response. And now I had a communication with President Walter about a week ago, and he indicated that he had submitted the emails that were requested. Well, they were never provided to me, and I don't think, so then I responded, well, I've reached out to the Washington County District Attorney to seek action against the board because there is a reasonable amount of time for those requests to be fulfilled. And so clearly, if President Walter had already turned over those emails, why aren't they being provided? I have my idea why they aren't being provided, because it is about more property negotiation that the residents are probably not happy about. So I'm just saying, there's a lot of questions the community has, and I think if they start diving into more emails and seeing some of this, it doesn't leave a good taste.
Thank you for coming forward. Is there anyone else that wishes to come forward at this time for citizen input?
Good evening, Scott Heffley, W159 and 10514 Old Farm Road, Germantown. Really just 5 comments quickly tonight. First of all, there's a tree plant on the agenda. It's long overdue and help clarify our mission so we're not out trimming trees where people have been taking care of them and like their trees and don't like what happened after we trimmed them. So don't know about the tree board, but you know, we'll need to get on that board and help make decisions. So we are a tree city. I don't know if anyone knew that. Just go look. We've been a tree city for years, and that's something to be proud of, and maybe this will help maintain that. So with regards to use ARPA dollars, I call ARPA manna from heaven because you're only getting it once. And that's fine that you spend it. I think it's great for us to use it for handguns if the cops need that, and that's fantastic. But my suggestion would be the chief should make it part of his budget like it does with squads. We rotate these things in and out. I don't know how it worked. Maybe every 3 years we give them half and the other half. I don't want to wait 7 years because we're not going to have ARPA dollars 7 years from now replace the guns. So I think it should be put in as part of a budget request, taken seriously by the board, and we find funding for it. If we do half every 3 years, then that'd be easier to work into the budget. So I don't think we should have to use dollars that we'll never get again to fund guns, because I think guns are an important part of our police and what they do. Also with the flock safety invoice, I'm happy that donations have paid for it, but that should also be in your budget. You know, listen to what happens in Milwaukee County. They use flock cameras to chase down suspects all the time. Their flock cameras are probably overused. They're used every day, seemingly, with a new high-speed crash. So I want them to be used and budgeted for. I think it's absolutely critical for us to have that. A little time. We had an in-depth discussion of the Ruckert-Melke report at Utility Advisory Committee last week. Seems more and more likely we need to do a division road in 2 phases and incorporate the extra 5 million or so we need in upgrades and pumps, powers, force mains at that same time. So spreading it over 2 budget years seems to be logical. And I live in Old Farm for almost 30 years, and 2/3 of all the sewage flows in Germantown go through the Old Farm lift station. Now, luckily I live on the top of the hill, but my neighbors on the bottom of the hill are going to have a serious problem if we have a big water event and we can't handle it with the pumps. So that's the last thing, and unfortunately I bring this up again. I'm standing up here again on camera saying that I still haven't heard from either one of my District 1 trustees. They have not called me, although I've asked, and I will keep asking. I want either one of you or both of you to call me, and there won't be emails sent. I just want to be called, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. Is there anyone else that wishes to come forward at this time for citizen input? Is there anyone on WebEx? Okay. There is no one else. We can go to consent agenda. Board?
Make a motion to approve consent agenda items A through H as presented.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve consent agenda items A through H. Is there any discussion on the motion to approve? No discussion? We'll do roll call vote, please.
Trustee Warren.
Aye.
Trustee Cutts.
Aye.
Trustee Baum.
Aye.
Trustee Jan Miller.
Aye.
Trustee Hudson, Trustee Rick Miller,
Aye.
Trustee Kaminsky, Village President Walter.
Aye. Motion passes. Next item is new business, starting with new business item A, Village of Germantown Community Development Department, proposed text amendments to zoning code section 17.40, wellhead protection of the Village of Germantown Municipal Code. To give us more information, background on this new business item, we'll turn the meeting over to our Community Development Director, Jeff Retzloff.
Thank you, Brian, for the assist. Since 1992, the Wisconsin DNR requires all new public water supply wells to have a wellhead protection plan. The Wisconsin DNR requires such a plan to include a protection area around a well to be a minimum of 1,200 feet or a geographic area of recharge that contributes water to the well within a 5-year time of travel distance. The Village of Germantown Wellhead Protection Ordinance was adopted in 2010 and is included in the zoning code under section 17.40. The Germantown Wellhead Protection Regulations include zoning-based restrictions on specific land uses and separation distances between land uses and water supply well and certain uses that have the potential for contaminating the recharge area and the well. All Village of Germantown wells have a groundwater protection overlay district that has additional zoning regulations through the wellhead protection regulations that apply in addition to and are more stringent than the underlying zoning district that also applies. Section 17.40 contains a list of permitted uses, conditional uses, and prohibited uses. It also has provisions for pre-existing uses that would ordinarily be prohibited or conditional use, but since they pre-existed the adoption of the code or were in existence in a location before a new well was installed that would otherwise be prohibited as a use or require a conditional use permit. There's also finally a provision for changing technology that may affect whether or not a use can be removed from the list of conditional or prohibited uses. The most significant text amendments proposed this evening generally concern the regulations that apply to pre-existing conditional uses and prohibited uses. So with that, I would point out that the proposed text amendments are grouped into 4 major categories. Amendment number 1 clarifies and expands the responsibilities of the Groundwater Technical Review Committee. That committee is comprised of the Public Works Director, Village Engineer, Fire Chief, the Water Utility Superintendent, and the Village Planner and Zoning Administrator. This particular text amendment assigns the responsibility to interpret section 17.40 for purposes of providing guidance to the zoning administrator for potential amendments to the code and administration and enforcement issues. While this has been a responsibility the committee has taken on in the past, the code is a little vague on that particular requirement. Amendment number 2 is broken out into 3 subcategories. The first, we're basically making some grammatical and term usage consistency revisions throughout 17.40. The second subcomponent is adding a provision that creates more flexibility for pre-existing uses and their locations. The third component of amendment number 2 creates a minimum set of criteria that an expanded, relocated, or substituted use has to meet to be approved. And finally, there's a section being added that has a requirement for a environmental report when a relocated or substituted use is proposed that requires an analysis of the new use compared to the pre-existing use that shows how the newer use would be less risk for contamination of the groundwater. Finally, the Fourth Amendment formally adopts a groundwater protection overlay district for well number 12. That graphic is shown here with a detail of that. On this particular slide, I would point out that well 12 is not quite operational. And since the Plan Commission recommendation last week, we have some new information that we received from the water utility consultant who is recommending delaying the adoption of the well 12 groundwater protection district map because of the ongoing evaluation of well modifications. It's expected that once those well modifications are identified and completed, new data would need to be analyzed, and that may take a few months. And so the consultant is recommending that with respect to this fourth component, Amendment 4, as listed here, that we delay that until a later date. Although the consultant indicated the recharge area is not likely to change, the capture zone within that area is. Capture zone is the area highlighted in red. The full recharge area is highlighted in orange. Nonetheless, they're recommending that we delay adoption of that particular map. So with that said, the Plan Commission recommendation from a week ago is to approve the proposed zoning code amendments as drafted. However, again, since that recommendation, staff is recommending withholding approval of the Amendment 4 component, where we will consider a new map once the improvements are made or modifications are made to well 12. Thank you.
Board,
Make a motion to approve as presented with a postponement of amendment number 4 till a future date as discussed.
motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion to approve? No discussion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Next item under new business, thank you, Jeff, is item B, well 12 investigation finding and next steps presentation by Water Quality Investigations. More information and background on this new business item. We have a representation from the Germantown Water Department and Public Works, and the gentleman from, I believe, Water Quality Investigations.
So good evening tonight. Our well 12 investigation is finally up to the next steps in what we found in our past testing. Andy Jacques with Water Quality Investigation has spoken before the board in the past, and he brings a wealth of knowledge and is intimately involved with this, the well's next step. So I introduce Andy to you and for any questions you may have for him.
All right, thank you. So I'm here to talk about well 12 and the decision basically for the liner going forward. So I want to go over just a little bit of a history, bring everybody up to speed. So the well was drilled and tested in 2021, which is quite common. We drill these wells ahead of time. And then once we get water quality that says that this is an acceptable location, then we cap the well and we design the well house. So that's what happened in 2021. In the fall of 2023, the well was uncapped, temporary pump was put in there so that the well could be sampled for some proposed regulations that the EPA has put forth. In the process of doing that sampling, we found very turbid water in the well. So there was a changed condition. It was alarming, and we wanted to figure out basically where that turbid water came from. So it was discolored and silty, and I'll get into that a little bit more as we go on. So then in the spring of this year, we did further investigation into the well to figure out why there was a changed condition there. So what we did, and there's a series of tests, I'm not going to go into depth on all of the things that we did, but in summary, we looked at it basically 3 different times. In the first more intensive investigation that we did was basically looking at that well with televising and then televising while we're pumping it. So we basically put a pump into so this first investigation, we just basically dropped the camera down into the well And we looked at basically the aquifer mineralogy and what was going on in there. And then we also ran some tools down in there to see that there's natural water movement in this well when it's not being pumped. So this graphic here shows where after we did the televising, we could visually see water moving. Then we ran a spinner tool down in there. We could actually quantify what was going on with water movement because the water movement is really part of why that was a change condition. We could see that there's 3 distinct aquifers here. We have an aquifer that's at about 155 feet down below the surface, an aquifer that's about 205 feet down below the surface and it's relatively thick, probably 30, 40 feet thick, and then an aquifer region that's 345 feet down. So most people, when you think about you're drilling a well, you're drilling a hole in the ground, and most people think there's a sea down there. That's not the case. A lot of times we have porous regions and we have very tough regions or very, impervious regions. In this well, we have these very distinct regions, which I'll show you a picture of in a little bit. What's unusual about this well, though, is that with the 3 distinct aquifers, the middle one, we can see water moving in, and then water moves up and down. That middle zone is under what we call higher hydrostatic pressure, or higher head. It means that there's a water body that's connected to it that's at a higher elevation, pushing that water into the well and pushing it up and down. So that's rather unusual. The pictures here show you a little bit about what that is. So the pictures on the top, the upper left picture is what the televising camera saw when the well was drilled back in 2021. The picture to the right of that is what it looked like when we did, after we did our pumping test. Notice that there's a fair amount of mineral material that's in the left picture that's missing in the right picture. That's when we pumped, the theory is that when we pumped this well in 2023 to beginning to do our testing for the EPA regulation, when we pumped it, we actually released that filter pack, what we want to call it, or material that was in that fracture, and that's what pumped out. And that's part of the area where water was moving up to. We reversed that flow when we pumped it. The middle pictures then are in that area around 205. The picture on the left there, that's a karst feature. So karst is where we have limestone and basically higher acidity or lower pH water went through there and dissolved it. So it's like a wormhole, but Mammoth Cave is a karst feature. This is a karst feature. It's relatively small. It's probably about 2 inches in diameter. But there's a fair amount of water that's coming in through that borehole or that karst feature. And then there's a fracture that's right to the right that's below that at 217 feet. Those 2 regions are producing a fair amount of water that under static conditions, we have 175 gallons per minute moving down and 30 gallons per minute moving up. So about 200 gallons a minute are moving in this well when there's not a pump in it, which is rather unusual. That movement only happens because we drilled a hole there. If we didn't have that hole there, this movement wouldn't be there. So for the last 2+ years then, when this well was drilled and capped, we had water moving in, up and down throughout the borehole. The middle region then, which I'll get into, we were seeing some turbidity basically or silt material coming in there when we pumped. The picture on the bottom then is an open bedding plane or a fracture karst feature that's at the very bottom of the well at 345 feet. It's more likely an open bedding plane. We have a change in geology. We go from limestone to shale. And often when we see these transitions in these wells, right above shale, we find an open bedding plane or where water, which can't move down, it hits that shale, it moves sideways. So we just happened to hit that when we drilled this well here. So what do we do? That was the spinner test to just see if there's natural movement in there. We looked at it a little bit further. We put a pump in there then and actually pumped the well, stressed it to find out how much water we're getting from each of these areas so that we can backtrack to find out where that silt was coming from. We did a lot of testing here. What I want to focus on is the picture on the left is that area at 155 feet prior to us doing any pumping. The picture on the right is when we had a camera down in and when we were pumping, it looks like a snowstorm. And we tested that water coming from that 155 feet. It had high iron, it had higher arsenic in it. That water from that zone basically is where the turbid, the brown discolored water and silty water came from when we did our pumping in 2023 to do the testing for the EPA. If we go down further in this well, The picture on the left is taken at 205 feet. Again, we're pumping. The pump is set at about 160, 170 feet. This camera is below the pump, so we're seeing water, turbid water coming up towards the pump. The camera, the picture on the left is about 200 or 197 feet. So that was water that was coming from this 205, 217 area. The picture on the right then is down at 280 feet, I believe. 285 feet. So that's actually below this zone, and we see relatively clear water. So we did sampling while we're doing this pumping. We dropped what we call a thief sampler down in there. We grabbed samples so we could actually quantify water quality at these different zones. We dropped the camera in there so we could visually see what it looks like. So we can confirm what one set of tests is telling us visually what our eyes are showing us. So we could see then that the two upper zones are I guess more problematic. There's higher iron and higher silt material in there. This picture shows that in our test pumping, we did what was called a step test. We ran it at 400 gallons a minute for 24 hours. And after 24 hours, we stepped it up to 800 gallons a minute, and we wanted to see how the well responded. And in that response then, what I'm showing there in the picture is we changed that speed of the pump to get more flow out of it. We had relatively turbid colored water then for quite a while. I think that was 20, 30 minutes. Again, that was coming from those fracture zones that were up high in the well, which I show in the graphic here. While we're pumping this well, we also monitored the nearby wells just to see the influence of the proposed well 12 then on the neighborhood wells. And when we were pumping at the 400 gallons a minute, I believe it was about 3 feet of drawdown, meaning that the water level in those wells dropped about 3 feet. We're pumping at 800 gallons a minute. We saw about a 7-foot of drop. And those are the wells that are closest to well 12. So this picture shows the wells in the area. Well 12 is on the bottom in the middle. And then the step-in wells, which is one is just to the west, and then one is just to the north of well 12. Those are the wells that we saw about 7 feet of drawdown. And that's pretty consistent with, and I believe it was a 72-hour pump test that was done originally. In that 72-hour pump test, we could see how the water level in those wells dropped rather fast, and then it just kind of tapered off and slowly was tapering in. We never saw it stabilize. In that pump test, we saw about 9 feet of drawdown. That is coming from basically the upper aquifer. So that 155-foot zone, that is hydraulically connected. I didn't show that graphic in here, but the 155-foot zone is hydraulically connected to the neighborhood wells. The 205-foot zone may also be hydraulically connected to the neighborhood wells. So when we did our pump test this time, consistent with the first pump test, that we show that there's influence then of well 12 on those neighborhood wells. There was a report that there may have been when we saw the turbid, when we changed our pumping rate from 400 to 800 feet, or 800 gallons per minute, we may have seen some disturbance in some of the neighborhood wells, but there was no further investigation on that. But it was rather coincidental that one of the wells saw some turbid water at that same time. I believe it was hydraulically connected, but we don't have enough data to actually, do that investigation and connect that. So then basically on the June pump test results, where we looked at it not only under static conditions, but pumping conditions and did all of our water quality, came to the conclusion that if we're going to keep the well as is and use it, that you really need to put an iron filter on this facility. So we have to put in a filter basically to remove the silt and iron that's in the water in order for us to use the well as it is. The other thing that we realize is that we're going to have to limit the capacity as well to 600 gallons a minute. At 600 gallons a minute, there still is the potential then for impact on the local wells. So what we did then is, what if we take away the upper and middle aquifer, and what happens with the capacity in the well, and what is the influence then on the neighborhood wells? So what we did then is we put a pump down into this well, setting it up at about 270 feet. And we put a packer in there, which is like an oversized balloon. It seals the pipe and the borehole. So the pump is pumping from anything from 260 feet down. That balloon then seals off anything, and nothing can move down towards the pump. So basically, the well itself, the upper and middle aquifer, completely isolated from our pumping. And then we're going to look at the hydraulics and water quality then for that lower zone. And after we inflated the packer, then we're just basically getting water from that zone at 345 feet. And we turned it on and pumped it between 800 and 900 gallons a minute. We saw a very little amount of iron at startup. It cleared up pretty quickly. And then there was the water quality after that initial startup was really good. And I can cover that here in a few minutes. The good thing is that we saw that there was no impact on the nearby wells. When we pumped it at the 800, 900 gallons a minute, we did not see the drawdown. And if anything, we actually saw a rebounding effect in the nearby wells, partly because, and this might be a little artificial, but with that packer sealed, and it had been sealed for 3 or 4 days prior to us doing our testing, we have that water moving in at 200 feet, going up to 155 feet. So we may have actually been pushing that local water table back up. So while this well has been open since 2021, we have been dewatering the local aquifer. Now with it sealed, we're actually recharging it or replenishing it from the middle aquifer. With the packer then and the data analysis, we can see then that this well has a capacity of probably 1,000 to 1,200 gallons a minute, almost double what we would get if we leave the whole borehole open, and we have very minimal impact then on the regional aquifer system. So our recommendation then is to install a liner in this well from the surface down to 260 feet. And all this is another casing. It's levitated in the well, and then we grout that casing in. So we have grout in between this liner and the native formation. There's grout in between the liner and the current casing that's there. It's completely sealed off then from the surface to 260 feet. The other thing that we want to do then is further develop the well. And what I mean by that is when we did do our pump test at 800, 900 gallons a minute, when we did a change in flow rate, we did see a little bit of turbid water for a few minutes. We believe then that because the well has been sitting here and the 205-foot zone, 155-foot zone, but the 205-foot zone, there's a fair amount of silt that's there. It looks to me like rock flour that's left over from when the glacier was here. That was moving in and down. So what we need to do is overdevelop the well to get that back out. So the idea then is once we get the liner in there, we're going to pump it at 2,000 gallons a minute, and we're going to surge it at 2,000 gallons a minute, and we're going to walk that silt out so that when we pump it at 1,000 gallons a minute, it won't be there. It might be something that we have to do occasionally, maybe 5 years, 8 years when we do a pull to redevelop it, if we wind up getting any silt that comes in between our operation, because these fractures are always flowing. The 205-foot area, that water is always moving. It's trying to go from a high point to a low point. So when we're not using the well, it's always going to be moving. Even that fracture is at 345 feet, that's always moving. So we're gonna wind up getting some material that's going to come in over time, but we can redevelop that going forward. With the pumping that we did on the middle and upper aquifer, we're not going to be able to basically deplete that source. And when we pumped it for 48 hours, at the end of that, we also did some flow changes, and we could see that we're still developing more of that silty material. So there really isn't an option, in my mind, to leave the well as it is, that we have to put the liner in there to isolate that off, which then is going to minimize the risk for the village in the future on water quality complaints and the risk then on the nearby impact of the nearby wells. So the nice thing about the liner then, right now you get a well, it's 1,000 to 1,200 gallons a minute, and you have a facility there that you can still drill a deep well in the future and get another 1,200 gallons a minute. So you have what I would call a unit well. You're tapped into 2 different aquifers, and you have one location then which has a wellhead protection plan in it that can be modified for a deep well. But then you have a critical facility that allows the village to basically meet demands in the future. That's all I have. So I'll open it up for questions.
Questions? Trustee Baum?
with the final solution here, what's the impact on neighboring residents?
Based on the data that we saw, it's zero.
Zero. Thank you.
Trustee Warren?
So when test wells were being drilled, aren't these issues that test wells should pick up, identifying these aquifers, this type of flow, this turbidity? Shouldn't that have been picked up? And then possibly this location rejected because of that?
It's a great question. Test wells are usually a small diameter. And I've been on many projects over the years with a small diameter well that we drill at a site. We drill it out to be a bigger diameter well, slightly off of where we're at. We get different water quality and we get different operational parameters. We're drilling a hole in the ground, assuming that everything down there is uniform, but it's not. I've seen it where we move over 50 feet and we went from a well that's 1,000 gallons a minute to a well that's only 500 because we didn't hit the soft spot, or we didn't hit the fracture. So it's a great question, but what we know about geology is we can never assume that when you drill one spot, move over, you can actually get the same thing. The fractures that are developed, and we've also seen it, I'm actually on a state project right now at a prison where they drilled a test well. The final well, when they drilled a bigger diameter, part of the well has collapsed. The test well did not show that. So once we get to a test well is a 6-inch diameter, now you drill a 20-inch diameter well, you have an area where you can more of this kind of loose, fragile material that can collapse in once we stress it under test pumping conditions. So the situation we have here is not that unusual. I think if I were to estimate or guess, probably 10% of the wells need more work once they're brand new because of issues that pop up that we cannot see then with a test well.
What's your cost estimate and duration for this based on your recommendation?
The liner estimate is probably around $150,000 once we pull in some of the extra work of doing the lining and doing some extended test pumping on it so we can redelineate this lower aquifer by itself. And then we have a contract in there for, I think it's around $25,000.
Once you start, how long does it take to complete that?
The liner work takes probably about 2 weeks. And then, so the process of putting the liner in is probably 3 or 4 days of welding it, putting it in there. We have to grout it. We have to let it sit for 72 hours by code. And that's before we can get in there and do any test pumping. And then we'll do some test pumping and development. So really it's probably 2 to 3 weeks total once they start.
Thank you.
Trustee Chan Miller?
Thanks for the detailed report. I appreciate the crafts. My question is, on one of the graphs here, you said that you had to use a, let me get it straight here. I don't know what it's called, packer.
Yep.
A packer. So will you have to be, will you need a packer? No.
No.
Okay, so we're just doing the liner.
The liner would be the permanent packer. So
Got it.
the liner seals off everything above 260 feet.
Okay. And then we're actually going down about 260, 70 feet, correct?
Yep.
And the liner will go all the way down, correct?
From the surface all the way down to 260 feet.
Okay. And the water will be pulled out of this 345-foot well?
That's where most of the waters come from. There are a
Right
couple
now.
of other little fractures and features that are above.
Sure, but the bigger one.
Correct.
Okay. And I can see where 155 feet would be considered, I would consider it a shallow well. What do you say?
Oh, yes. Yep.
Okay. What about 345? Is that a shallow well?
It's a great question. In this area, we could say that there's probably 3 regions that we could drill in. We do have a shallow alluvial well system. So alluvial basically is our sand and gravels. So I think the casing comes down to, I just have to get over to the graphic here. Casing comes down to about 100 feet. There is unconsolidated material at this location about 17 feet down. So we have in this area 17 feet of gravel, and then we have limestone. Not too far to the west of here, you'll have hundreds of feet of gravel. So we do have a shallow gravel system that just to the west of us could be an aquifer, but here it's not.
Okay.
But the limestone then down to 345 feet, that is a shallow system
Oh.
that has 3 different aquifers in it.
Oh.
The deeper system, then once we hit that shale at 345 feet, that delineates between the shallow system and the deep system. Once we get below that Macocata shale, then we're down into the Mount Simon sandstone, which is a deep aquifer,
It's a what?
a deep aquifer.
Okay. So below that.
Correct. And so in the future, we could drill a well here, case it down through the Macocata shale, and then we would draw water from a separate aquifer, being the deep aquifer. Those two are hydraulically disconnected. So we pump the shallow or the deep, and they won't get any mixing between them. So neither one would actually affect the other.
You can you do that through the same, or you would
Drill a
keep
separate well.
separate? Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
And then, why wouldn't we go deeper to begin with?
Because you have a very good quantity of water here that really doesn't need any further treatment than chlorine.
Okay,
The deeper aquifer, you risk having to treat for radium.
for radium?
Yep. But having the 2 wells blended, then the radium limit would be below the limit. You would not have to treat for it.
Okay. And what about, we don't have to treat it all? There's no PFAS? We're good?
No, there was no PFAS in the water. Nope.
That's super.
Yeah, it's great news.
And then the neighbors are happy? And, is this the optimum, I'm thinking this is gallons per minute, is that right? GPM?
ppm, yes, that's gallons per minute.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, 12 to get 2,400,
Uh,
correct?
The deep well with well 12. So basically the deep well next to it could be 1,200 gallons a minute, and well 12 could be 1,200 gallons a minute. So
Okay.
the 2 of them together, you'd have one facility for 2,400 gallons a minute,
Okay,
which would be about double, a little bit more than double your largest well that you have in the village.
would that be like, could you, I'm just asking, could you drill the deep well within 6 feet of the current one, or does it have to, is there a parameter that you have to be far away?
I'm not sure how big the site is, but it would be moved over.
So we designed the building to accommodate a second well.
That's what I was
Yeah, so it would
wondering.
be in
'Cause
the
it's
same
huge.
footprint. We would just do an addition.
Okay, okay,
It'd be on
that's
the other
smart.
end of the building, so we have some
Right.
separation,
Gotcha.
20 feet or so.
Okay,
Yes.
that's good, that's good. Sounds like we'll have enough water, right?
Yeah, it's a nice spot for long-term planning for the village.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? On this item, are we to approve the recommendation, or is that happen in item C?
It's the next item C.
Okay. Any other questions? There's no other questions. Thank you for your presentation. Very thorough and very informative. Appreciate it. Thank you. We'll go on to new business item C, award of contract to Water Quality Investigations for design and inspection services for liner installation in well 12 for an amount not to exceed $24,500 from account number 454-08460-543-100.
I'll make a motion to award the contract to Water Quality Investigations as stated, not to exceed $24,500.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion to approve? Trustee Jan Miller.
Matt, for one of these this might not be it, but for one of these design and inspection, I don't know if it was for the liner, but there was for a full project for, well, I think it was $90,000. Is that right?
Right, we had a proposal before the board several sessions ago that was a multi-phase proposal for CTW to do additional testing and investigation. They conducted the first 2 phases of that investigation for a total of about $33,000. And that's where we felt that we had enough data to proceed with what you've been presented with this evening.
Okay, so does the 90 or 97,000, that's the total project. So we've got 33 out of it and then about 25 also coming out of that. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, it's essentially the same funding. It's the water utility funding.
Okay.
It's just that
So we've
we
got-
wouldn't spend that, approximately $60,000 that could have been allocated to CTW because we gathered enough information in those first couple phases.
All right.
Further discussion on the motion to approve? No further discussion. We'll do a roll call vote, please.
Trustee Warren.
Aye.
Trustee Cutts.
Aye.
Trustee Bum.
Aye.
Trustee Jane Miller.
Aye.
Trustee Hudson. Trustee Rick Miller.
Aye.
Trustee Kaminsky. Village President Walter.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion passes. Takes care of all items on tonight's agenda. The next village board meeting will be on Monday, September,
No.
Tuesday, I'm sorry, Tuesday's September 3rd at 7 PM here at the Village Hall Boardroom. We are adjourned. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you all for watching, and have a good night.